I would like you all to imagine the following situation. You're sitting at home watching television when the microwave beeps. You go over to get your popcorn, but without knowing it, something about your movement have changed. It's not something you or anyone around you can notice, but this small shift is the first whisper of a future diagnosis. Might be invisible to other people, but it might hold in it a future diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. It's a bit scary, right? But what if we could find those signs early on? What if there was something we could do about it before it's too late? Now it's better, right? So Parkinson's disease is a progressive neurodegenerative disorder that affects over 10 million people worldwide. By the time a clinical diagnosis occurs, over 60% of neurons producing dopamine in the brain are already gone. Treating it is like trying to fix a bridge after it has already collapsed, rather than fixing it when the first cracks appear. If we can find these first cracks, we can intervene with therapies that preserve function and improve quality of life. Well, this thing actually exists. There is a thing called prodromal Parkinson's. It's the stage before the disease is fully diagnosable. There are signs, but it's not yet distinct enough to meet clinical criteria. Imagine that you're standing in the grocery store trying to choose the right peach. And at a first glance, they all look the same. But when you take a deeper look and you test the texture and you check for firmness and aroma, you start to identify which peach is the right one. And the same thing goes for prodromal Parkinson's. We try to identify which measures would be the right ones to tell us who's going to have it in a few years. The key measure we use is likelihood ratio. This measure is a research measure, not a clinical measure, but it tells us the risk of someone having Parkinson's disease in a few years. So how we traditionally calculate this measure is by taking into account a few parameters. It starts with background estimates, goes all the way to exposure to environmental hazards, as well as genetic findings, and also results of diagnostic tests. This includes, for example, having a first-degree family member with Parkinson's disease. Also, a specific mutation or a sleep disorder, and even some seemingly unrelated symptoms. For example, constipation, loss of smell, and some behaviors like caffeine consumption and smoking. You can notice that usually when we talk about Parkinson's disease, the diagnosis is about tremors and rigidity, some really motoric stuff. But with likelihood ratio, we don't emphasize that as much. We believe, since the disease is mostly a motoric disease, these signs appear way before the diagnosis. This is where digital mobility measures come in. So what digital mobility measures are? It's a way to measure movement. We use accelerometers. They measure acceleration. So it measures changes in speed or direction, giving us a detailed picture of how someone moves throughout their day. These sensors are a continuous, objective way to measure movement in real-world settings. Unlike a doctor's appointment, where observations are limited to a few minutes, these sensors allow us to observe for hours, weeks, and even months. What's so exciting to me about these devices is how it can detect the subtle changes that happen years before clinical diagnosis. We take our subjects, who are family members of diagnosed Parkinson's patients, and we give them this accelerometer. It's about this big. We mount it on their lower back. Then they take it home. And this device is like our own little spy, tracking every one of their movements. Once they come back after a week, we have a huge amount of data about every movement they've done. We have an amazing team of engineers that extrapolate features, measures out of this data. So an example of this data would be how someone walks, how symmetrical it is, how they behave during the night. With this mind-boggling amount of data in our hands, we do not forget our roots. Our biological and clinical instincts are important. For example, do you sometimes stand up too quickly and get a little dizzy? I know it happens to me, but Parkinson's disease patients have that more often than others, which means they have orthostatic hypotension. They might even faint. Now, don't worry, if it happens to you, it doesn't mean you have Parkinson's disease. But we figure that since it happens to Parkinson's disease patients, maybe it happens even before, but not so strongly, not the way that someone can notice, that it does affect their behavior. So we looked through the data and found that prodromal patients do take more time to switch from rest to standing up, maybe to protect themselves from that. We use this information in order to create a new calculation for likelihood ratio. Finding the right features is not an easy task. It's a challenge. We want to get most accurate we can and the most sensitive we can. We want to be right most of the time and the least wrong we can be. To do that, in this type of research, we use analytical methods and machine learning algorithms in order to find the right set of features. Then, with these features, we train our model to predict the likelihood ratio of a person, the risk of them having Parkinson's in the next few years, based on one simple test. Taking this device home for a week and coming back. But as you might understand, it's all pretty new. It's not something we are used to deal with as a medical test. So what we're doing now is taking these measures and finding how normal people treat. Like, what's the right amount of times a person rolls over at night? How long should it take to switch from rest to standing up? We're trying to find the normal values and the non-normal values. Also, since we've tested some of our subjects for a few consecutive years, we are now testing the progression of these measures, how it changes over time. What part of this change is attributed to aging, and what part is attributed to the growing Parkinson's disease. Sounds really good, at least to me, but challenges remain. Collecting the data, analyzing it, and integrating it into clinical use is difficult. We need scientists, researchers, clinicians, developers, even regulators to work together in order for that to happen. Yet, there are opportunities. For patients, we can create better clinical trials with the right sample of people who are actually going to have Parkinson's. We can find better therapies and drugs for them that will slow down the progression of the disease. For healthcare systems, we can decrease the amount of effort they put on late-stage Parkinson's disease. Let's wrap it up. We've seen how frustrating it is to detect Parkinson too late, when there's not much we can do. We've seen that we know how to find it early, but it's clumsy, it's difficult. We have hope because there's a simple way using motor symptoms, but we know there's still a lot to go. With our eyes to the future, I hope this research inspires collaboration and initiatives in the topic to create a better future for patients with Parkinson's disease or diseases like that, a better treatment, and hopefully even a cure. Thank you.